last week during class, I think this mic, I bumped it or something and got to where you couldn't hear. So can you hear okay right now? All right, so let me know if something happens and you can't hear again. I'll try to get that fixed. Okay, let's see. We've been having our weekly Wednesday night check of gas prices. Anybody find I didn't get to drive by Sam's tonight. Anybody drive by Sam's? It's under $3.70. It's getting really cheap now. It's like $3.64, I think, around town. So we're all saving money now. What? $3.63 at Sam's yesterday. There you go. All right, get out there and save some money. That's like how things are relative, right? A month ago, we would have said $3.63. No way. That's way too high. And now it's what a bargain. Now, last week, the kids are out at camp this week, and it's 100 degrees every day. That is burning hot. So I hope they're getting some relief inside, some shade out there. They did get some rain, I guess, on Sunday night, Monday to get started with camp, but hopefully they're having a great week, and lots of great memories from camp for lots of us. Do you remember who we were talking about last week? Who? Mary and Martha. That's exactly right. Mary and Martha. And so we talked about the story of Mary and Martha hosting Jesus in their home. And actually it tells us whose home it was. Whose home was it? It was Martha's home. And Martha and Mary are sisters. And one, of course, was listening to Jesus, and one was doing all the cooking and preparations and was quite distressed by that and wanted her sister to help. You remember which one was which? Which was the one who was doing all the preparations? Martha, yes, Martha. You were concerned about many things, but only one thing is important, and Mary has chosen the better part. It's kind of our mission in life, to choose the better part. And it's not that Martha had chosen something evil. She just didn't make the best choice. Life is full of choices, and it's often a good, better, best. Those are quite difficult sometimes, aren't they? And Mary chose the better part in that situation. But the story is not over for Martha, because Martha and Mary have a brother that we started that story, I think, near the end of class. Who is their brother? Yes, Lazarus is their brother. And we talked about the idea, we don't really know how old they are, but certainly in life, generally speaking, our sibling relationships are our longest relationships in life. They're longer than parent-child relationships generally. They are longer than husband-wife relationships generally, because you get kind of a 20-year start, don't you, before weddings and so forth. So they're very close, and Jesus is very close to the family. Last week we talked about which town they lived in. Which town did Mary, Martha, and Lazarus live in? Somebody's saying it. Bethany. That's right. Bethany. How far is Bethany outside of Jerusalem? Yeah, 2 miles. 2 miles. We could all still walk 2 miles, right? We could walk 2 miles in about 35 minutes, maybe, something like that. We wouldn't be jogging. We wouldn't be power walking. We'd just be walking. We could do it in less than an hour quite easily. And of course, walking is their mode of transportation mostly. For Mary and Martha, at Martha's home, of course, Martha is doing something important. She's opened her home. She's showing hospitality. And those of you who do that know how much work goes into that. And sometimes you would like to have some help. And sometimes you got to do it by yourself. I don't know how that works. But Martha, Who knows? Martha could have been, or are you one of the moms, one of the ladies who, like, I'm doing this cooking and I'm doing it by myself. I don't need any help in the kitchen, except when my sister is here and she's out there having fun. I want her in here helping. It's kind of maybe what was happening. I don't know. But Martha, even though she did not choose the better part in that story, she's going to do in the Lazarus story of his resurrection, his raising from the dead. She's going to shine, and Martha's going to have some, I think, powerfully good things about her. Some of the words that were used in the Luke passage about, it was Luke chapter 10, about Mary and Martha and the hosting of the meal. Martha was distracted, and she was worried, and she was upset about the preparations. And often that describes our lives, and I'm not talking about just for a cooking situation. For whatever it is that you do. Guys, that's part of us too, isn't it? For whatever the deals are with the house, whatever's going on with paying the bills. And I'm not saying only one does one and one does the other. I know every family kind of figures that one out. But we all get a little worried and upset and distracted. And sometimes our distractions are not the most important things. And that was part of that story. You remember when Martha asked Jesus about, what about my sister? Tell her to come help me. And there's another story that's not completely different from that. It's two guys, and Jesus is just, this is after the resurrection. Jesus has told Peter what's going to happen. You remember that? He tells Peter, the day is coming when you won't get to choose where you're going and when you're coming and going. You're going to be led about. And he was indicating the kind of death that he was going to be suffering in chains. And do you remember what Peter said next? What about him? What about John? It's sometimes how we are, right? What about him? And that's what Martha was saying. What about her? Make her help me. Peter was saying, well, what about John? If I'm going to suffer that sort of an ending of my life, what about him? Do you remember the response of Jesus? It's kind of a classic response. What? Yes. Basically, he said, you mind your own business, follow me. Don't worry about him, follow me. It's such an interesting story. We're going to jump there for just a second. This is John chapter 21, and then we'll get into our real story. John chapter 21, verse 17, Jesus said, feed my sheep. I tell you the truth, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted, but when you are old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said, follow me. Peter turned and saw the disciple whom Jesus loved was following them. This was the one who leaned back against Jesus at the supper and had said, Lord, who is going to betray you? When Peter saw him, he asked, Lord, what about him? Jesus answered, if I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? You must follow me. And that's kind of a big lesson. Doesn't matter what happens to somebody else. Doesn't matter if you feel like you're getting a bad deal. You follow me. You follow me. There's an interesting, kind of a side note. John, if you study John, many times John is like his own commentator. He explains what he's writing about, which is very helpful. Can you see that when reading that, it's when Jesus said, if I want him to remain alive until I return, that phrase makes it sound like Jesus might be saying, John's not going to die. John's staying. John is not going to die. Can't you see how people could read that into that part of the statement? If I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? You must follow me. Because of this, here's where John becomes a commentary upon himself. Because of this, the rumor spread among the brothers that the disciple would not die. But Jesus did not say that he would not die. He only said, if I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? All right. Rumors got started back in the old days, even right around the disciples and Jesus. Because you got to be careful about how you hear things and interpret things. And people had heard maybe what they wanted to hear, but not what Jesus was saying. Now, we're going to the story of Lazarus, and it's John chapter 11. And it seems like we got started on the reading of this last week. And we'll read quickly through some of the beginning of it and catch up to where we were. John chapter 11, verse 1. Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, Lord, the one you love is sick. There's something good about what John has said in verse 2. You notice how he says this Mary? Why do you think he says this Mary? Remember last week when we talked about how many different Marys there are in the New Testament? And John is kind of giving us a commentary on this. This is the Mary who is the one who pours the perfume on Jesus. In case you get mixed up on which Mary we're talking about, John is giving us the direct explanation. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume. Now, that hasn't happened yet. That's going to happen in the next chapter. Was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, Lord, the one you love is sick. When he heard this, Jesus said, this sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So there's a special relationship that Jesus has with Martha, Mary, and Lazarus. I don't think it says that about anyone else except, it does say that, John, how does John describe himself in his own gospel? The disciple whom Jesus loved. And then there is another interesting situation where a would-be follower comes to Jesus, and it says, and Jesus looked at him and loved him. You remember who that was? He ended up walking away sorrowfully. The rich young ruler, yes. Well, he has a special relationship with this family. Yet when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. He wasn't that far away. And he said to his disciples, let us go back to Judea. But Rabbi, they said, a short while ago, the Jews tried to stone you, and yet you were going back there. Remember we read that part last week. If you turn back just a chapter 10, verse 31. Again, the Jews picked up stones to stone him, but Jesus said to them, I have shown you many great miracles from the Father. For which of these do you stone me? So that is the situation. It's a pretty intense situation. They're getting ready to stone Jesus. And it says later, verse 39, again, they tried to seize him, but he escaped their grasp. So the situation is that they want to kill Jesus. He knows it. The disciples know it as well. Are we going back there? Verse 9, Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours of daylight? A man who walks by day will not stumble, for he sees by this world's light. It is when he walks by night that he stumbles, for he has no light. After he had said this, he went on to tell them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going to wake him up. So if we were one of the disciples and heard that, or if we read and just stopped there, it would be easy to think, he's not sick, he's sleeping. Because Jesus is using some symbolic words But then John gives some more explanation, being a commentary on his own writing, I think. Verse 12, his disciples replied, Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better. Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. We would have probably all thought the same, but John is, when he's writing this, in hindsight, is telling us an explanation. Verse 14, so then he told them plainly, Lazarus is dead, and for your sake I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe, but let us go to him. The things that Jesus did so that people would believe. This is certainly one of them, a very specific act that he allowed to happen. Could he have gotten to Lazarus in time to save him? Or he could have done what he did with the centurion that we studied 2 or 3 weeks ago. Do you remember that? What did he do with the centurion's servant? He just healed him from a distance. Remember, the centurion said, I'm not worthy for you to come under my house, but I'm a man under authority just like you, and you can give commands, and it will be done. And so could Jesus from a distance have said, Lazarus, be healed? He could have, but he had a different purpose in the way that he was going to do this miracle. But let us go to him. Then Thomas, called Didymus, I think we talked about this last week. Do you remember what Didymus means? Twin. Thomas must have been a twin. We don't know about who his brother was, perhaps one of the 12, but we don't know that. Then Thomas, called Didymus, said to the rest of the disciples, let us also go that we may die with him. And one of the things we mentioned last week was that at this point, we should be able to see Thomas as more than the doubter. He is the brave man who's willing to put his life on the line, knowing that when they go there, they could be killed. The Jews want to stone him. They're going to the place, that area where the Jews wanted to kill him and were seeking to kill him. And Thomas is speaking up. Usually it's Peter speaking up. Here's Thomas speaking up, saying, let's go with him that we may die with him. All right, one for all for one. Thomas, I think, showing true colors there as a brave man. Verse 17. On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. Do you see what's starting to emerge? Martha is going to Jesus this time. Mary staying at home. Right? Martha, the one who stayed in the kitchen cooking while Mary sat at his feet. Here, Martha is going to Jesus and Mary is staying at home for some reason. So I think we're starting to see a pretty grand side of the faith of Martha as this story develops. Verse 21, Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. What do you think Martha is saying? That he can bring him back to life. Yes. Martha's saying, Jesus, you could have, if you'd have been here, you could have saved her, but even now, you could still do this. Now, that's faith. I know that all the miracles that Jesus performed are not included in the Bible. Do y'all remember how John described that? If everything that Jesus had done had been recorded, how did John say that? That's right. All the books in the world could not have held everything that Jesus had done. So all we know is what has been recorded. How many people is it recorded that Jesus brought back from the dead? Of course, Lazarus is fixing to be one of them. Just two others. Just two others. Do you remember who they were? I'm sorry? Yes, one of them is a widow's son, her only son, who had died, and Jesus brought him back to life. Correct. And the other one was somebody who actually, the name is given of the father. Jairus, that's exactly right, Jairus. So there's Jairus' daughter in Matthew chapter 9, and the widow's son, which is in Luke chapter 7, and Lazarus in John chapter 11. Is it possible that Mary or that Martha had seen it or at least heard of those two? That's possible. It's possible. But she expresses the faith that Jesus could have done for them, for Lazarus, what he had done for the others. You could bring him back to life. And even now, she says, verse 22, but I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. So she's not just saying it, but she's basically saying it. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Have you ever noticed in the Old Testament how often they talk about life after death? Not much. Not much. And so they are living in a time, okay, Jesus is having a discussion with her. This is the deep spiritual discussion that they are having basically in the cemetery. Jesus said to her, wait, let me back up. Verse 23, Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha answered, I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Is Martha expressing faith? Not just in the resurrection, but specifically in the resurrection of her brother. If you were asked tonight, when you die, if you died tonight, would you go to heaven? Right? Would you say right away, yes? If somebody asked about you, would your wife, would your sister, would your brother, would your friend go to heaven if they died tonight? Would it be easier to answer? It's probably, I think it's easier to answer for somebody else because we can see somebody else's life and see what a good person that they are, and we see all of our own flaws, and we have some hesitance maybe to answer, yes, I'm going to heaven if I die tonight. But here Martha is speaking about her brother. Yes, he's going to heaven. I know he will rise again in the resurrection. I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live, even though he dies. And whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? All right. That's deep. That is deep questions these are deep questions that Jesus is asking of Martha. What do you believe? Those are hard questions. What do you really believe? She said, yes, Lord. She told him, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who was to come into the world. Let's look at verse 27 for just a minute, because her response to Jesus is one of those, it's a powerful statement. And it's been said before. All right? When you look at that statement, who has said this before? That's right, Peter said this before. And what did Jesus say after Peter said almost the exact same words? I'm sorry? Yeah, that's right. He said, here are the keys. He said, upon this rock, I will build my church, and basically here are the keys of the kingdom. All that in Matthew 16, a powerful statement of Peter. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And she says almost the exact same words. And usually when we think of the great confession, we usually think of, at least I usually think of Peter, But who else could we be thinking about? Martha, who said virtually the same thing as Peter in that great confession. And so to me, this is where Martha shines. She shows her faith in Jesus. She shows her faith in his power, that he would that that he could raise Lazarus right now, and that he could have raised Lazarus or kept him from dying, and that Lazarus is going to rise again, and that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. So she's expressing her faith. That's the kind of credit that she should get. It's sort of one of those, how many people are really one-dimensional people? Nobody is one-dimensional. Everybody has these different facets of their life. You might be more well-known for one thing or another, but there's more than one side to you. And for Martha, she had the one side, Martha, Martha, you're worried about many things. She has this other side, this great faith side. Right? Thomas, doubting Thomas. He couldn't believe unless he put his hands upon the prints in the hands of Jesus. Thomas, I'm willing to go and die with you. You know, there's much more than one-dimensional. And I think that's the way our lives are also. Do you want to be known for your worst moment? We've all had some bad moments. Do you want to be known for your worst moment? Is it really fair to Thomas for him to be known as doubting Thomas? He had good moments. Is it really fair to Martha to be remembered as Martha, Martha, you were worried about many things? Because she had this great side of her faith here. Well, let's keep going. Verse 28. After that, and after she had said this, she sent back and called her sister Martha aside. The teacher is here, she said, and is asking for you. You notice something there in the conversation? In your red letters, do you ever see it printed there that Jesus was asking for Mary? No, because they can't possibly record everything that Jesus said. And so you know that when you're reading these stories, every word that Jesus said is not recorded. Jesus was asking for her. We know that because Martha said that, not because we have the red letters printed there. The teacher is here, and she said, and is asking for you. When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house comforting her noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Notice anything about what Mary has said? Look back at verse 21. Martha said to Jesus, if you had not been here, my brother would not have died. These are two sisters who are thinking alike here, aren't they? They said the exact same words, not knowing that, but they said the exact same thing. And they both have that faith, knowing that Jesus could have healed their brother. Verse 33, when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. So, there are many emotional scenes in the Bible and in the New Testament. And in particular, here's one of the very emotional scenes. Jesus at the tomb of his friend. And seeing the mourning of the people. He's deeply moved in spirit. He's deeply moved, and he knows what he's going to do. He already knows he's going to raise Lazarus from the dead, and he's deeply moved at the sorrow that he is seeing expressed by all the friends of Lazarus whom he loved. There are just a couple of other times in the Bible that I'm thinking of when it talks about Jesus was deeply moved and he was emotional and he wept. He wept here. Think of a couple of other times where it says that about Jesus specifically. Garden of Gethsemane, right? And then also in the after the triumphal entry into Jerusalem, Jesus looks over the city and weeps over Jerusalem. So there's those two other times plus this when it talks about this deep emotion of Jesus. Come and see, they said. Jesus wept. Short verse, shortest verse in the Bible, and yet maybe one of the most emotional in the whole Bible. Then Jesus said, then the Jews said, see how he loved him. Some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? Other people around also are expressing some faith there. They've seen the power of Jesus before. So before we get to the end of this, does somebody have some thoughts, any comments you want to add that you've been thinking about? Yes, Dennis. Yeah. Yeah, I think you're exactly right. Venice was saying that it just really appears that he has a close relationship. He has spent time with them. He loves them. He knows about their faith, talks with them about faith. There's a lot more going on here than what these few verses have been able to express. But we get a glimpse into what's going on, and there's a lot going on. And it's a very emotional scene. Verse 38. Jesus, once more, deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. Take away the stone, he said. Let's just think for a second. Try to picture that in your mind. He comes to the tomb. He says, roll away the stone. Could this be deja vu? I don't know if that's a real thing, but we use that word a lot. What could Jesus be thinking here? Yes, Jesus is going to be there in a short time. It's going to be him inside the tomb. 3 days, not 4 days. And a stone in front of the entrance to the tomb. I just conjecture that he must be thinking, this is going to be me. And it's a short time from now. It's just a few days, maybe weeks before the crucifixion. And you would think that probably in his own mind, he's thinking about and picturing his own upcoming death and the results that happen after that. Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. Take away the stone, he said. But Lord, said Martha, the sister of the dead man, by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days. Martha is telling Jesus what? Something that he clearly already knows. How do you respond when somebody tells you something that you already know? Can you be patient with that? All right, Jesus, everybody knows that. Everybody around knows that he's been dead for 4 days and that there's going to be an odor at this point. By this time, there's a bad odor, for he has been there for 4 days. Then Jesus said, did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me. All right, this is all part of a design of Jesus, I think, to have a different setting for a miracle that's going to be powerful in a way that they haven't seen before, and that's going to strengthen or create belief in the people. When he had said this, Jesus called out in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." Okay, it's an old joke, but why did he say, "Lazarus, come out"? Because only one was getting to come out, right? If he just said, "Come out," all the dead people are coming out. No, he just wanted one, just calling one, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Can't you just picture an old black and white scary movie happening here? And the mummy is coming out, and he's still got the cloths wrapped around him, and he's trying to walk, probably an uncomfortable walk with all that around him. Jesus said to him, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." So, what about Lazarus? What comes to mind for you about Lazarus? Okay, so there's one thing. Tony said, "I'm going to heaven anyway. You brought me back. I was there. Now I'm back here." All right. Why didn't you just leave me there? Okay. Samuel wasn't happy when he got called up, right? In the Old Testament. Okay, there's one thing. Someone who's died and gone to heaven, do they really want to come back to earth? Okay. Which brings to mind that Lazarus, don't you think he was the top man on the speaking circuit for the rest of his life? What's going to be the title of his lesson every time he talks? What does everybody want to know? What happened over there? What did you see? Was it bright? Was it the bright light? Did you see people? Did you talk to anybody? I mean, he must have had some stories. 4 days he was dead. What was going on with Lazarus for 4 days? I don't know. I can't even begin to figure out what that might have been. But to me, that might have been fascinating to get some glimpse into that. And he becomes a popular man. And because of him, many believe. And because of him, do you remember what the response of the Jewish leaders is going to be? Yeah. Now we got to kill Lazarus too. Lazarus will be one of those few people who dies twice, right? It's as we continue to read this, verse 45, therefore many of the Jews who had come to visit Mary and had seen what Jesus did put their faith in him. That's exactly what Jesus wanted to come from this. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. An interesting reaction from people who saw the exact same thing. Some believe and some have to go tell. Then the chief priests and the Pharisees called a meeting of the Sanhedrin. What are we accomplishing? They asked. Here's this man performing many miraculous signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him. And then the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. What are the Jewish leaders concerned about? They've got a good deal of political influence in the region of Judea. And that's what they want. They don't want to lose their political influence. They're not happy for somebody else's good news. You ever known somebody like that? There's somebody had some good news and someone's not happy about it. Instead of being happy about somebody's good news, they're upset about their good. Everybody should have been happy about Lazarus' good news, but not the Jewish leaders. Then one of them named Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, spoke up. You know nothing at all. You do not realize that it is better for you that one man die for the people than the whole nation perish. He did not say this on his own, but as high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the Jewish nation. Do you see how John in verse 51 has written a commentary on his own writing. He's explained to us what was going on. Caiaphas didn't really know what he was saying, but he's prophesying about Jesus dying for the Jewish nation. Verse 52, and not only for that nation, but also for the scattered children of God, to bring them together and make them one. Who were the scattered children? And to make them one. The Gentiles, right? There's a big picture going on. So from that day on, they plotted to take his life. Therefore, Jesus no longer moved about publicly among the Jews. Instead, he withdrew to a region near the desert, to a village called Ephraim, where he stayed with his disciples. When it was almost time for the Jewish Passover, many went up from the country to Jerusalem for their ceremonial cleansing before the Passover. They kept looking for Jesus, and as they stood in the temple area, they asked one another, "What do you think? Isn't he coming to the feast at all?" But the chief priests and Pharisees had given orders that if anyone found out where Jesus was, he should report it so they might arrest him. All right, so there's a lot of intrigue going on over plans for the arrest of Jesus at this point. Now, the first bell has already rung. We're going to get started into the third story about Mary and Martha and Lazarus. And it's in 3 Gospels. I hope that you would take time to read them. We'll just keep reading in John chapter 12. But if your Bible has a note, it's in John chapter 12 and Matthew chapter 26 and Mark chapter 14. 6 days before the Passover. All right, so we're getting some context of time. It's not long before Jesus is going to be killed in the Passover week, right? It's 6 days before the Passover. That's how close this is all happening to the crucifixion of Jesus. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus arrived at Bethany, where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. Here a dinner was given in Jesus' honor. Martha served. All right, has Martha learned her lesson from the first time when they were making supper? It doesn't look like it. I don't know. Maybe she's the only one. By the way, whose house are they at? Well, you start to assume that, well, what town are they in? They're back in Bethany. Who lives in Bethany? Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. Whose house were they in before? Martha's. All right, so I'm sure you've heard people say, never assume anything. Don't assume that they're at Martha's house. They're not. It seemed like they would be because Martha's serving, but they are not in Martha's house. And we'll get that from one of the other Gospels. Martha served while Lazarus was among those reclining at the table with him. Okay. Where's Mary? Then Mary took a pint of pure nard, an expensive perfume. She poured it on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair, and the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. So the dinner is given in honor of Jesus. Martha is serving again, and Mary is not serving again. And Mary again is at the feet of Jesus, where she was at the other dinner. And Martha's where she was at the other dinner, but they're in somebody else's house. Mary anointed the feet of Jesus with an expensive perfume. You ever have something really expensive? Hesitate to use it? Plan for just the right time to use it? Okay, another passage is going to tell us how much this is worth. You remember, well, just a few more verses is going to tell us it was worth a year's wages. How much do you make in a year? It's a little bit different for everybody, right? But however much you make for a year, would you be willing to do this? Just bring it in and give it? It's a big gift. It's a big gift. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. Verse 4. But one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray him, objected. Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages. All right, so sounds like Judas is saying something good. We could use this to help a lot of people. He did not say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. As keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. John has told us something that we didn't know anywhere else. The treasurer is Judas. He's a greedy person and he helps himself to the money. Okay. Do you remember when Jesus was tempted by the devil in the desert? How many days was he there? 40 days. And we get 3 temptations told to us, and Jesus replies with the scripture each time. Anybody happen to remember what book of the Old Testament Jesus quoted each time? Yes, it was Deuteronomy. That's right, it was Deuteronomy. I think it might be Jesus' favorite book. He also quotes Psalms a lot, the book of Psalms. But guess who Jesus is about to quote in the next verse, verse 7. Leave her alone, Jesus replied. It was intended that she should save this perfume for the day of my burial. They don't even know what he's talking about. Okay, but he does, because he knows he's going to be buried similar to Lazarus in just a week. You will always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me. Guess where that verse came from? Deuteronomy. Jesus knew the scriptures, and Deuteronomy was one of his top out of the 39 Old Testament chapters, Old Testament books. Okay, I think the second bell is already rung, so thanks for coming tonight. Hope you have a good rest of the week. Look forward to seeing you again next Wednesday night.